Many people take care of their final arrangements decades before their death, so their families aren't left with added stress on top of their grief.
But Nate Morabito had a community watchdog investigation. He revealed some who bought services from a Blunteville cemetery are not getting what they paid for. Nate?
You know, if there's not a resolution soon, there's the potential for many more people to be impacted. The cemetery in question is one many of us pass all the time. It's right across from Tri-Cities Airport. It changed names and owners in recent months, and both sides are refusing to honor past customer contracts. That's resulting in added heartache during what is already the most difficult time of people's lives. Barbara Skaggs knows burying her mother was never going to be easy. But it was also never supposed to be this difficult.
Let us pray.
12 days after her mom's death,
give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses.
Today is the first time she's truly able to grieve.
For thine is the kingdom and the power.
This is her. She was 81 when she passed.
Skaggs will never forget the look on her mother's face when she died on February 18th in this house.
I knew that she felt comfort in this because in her mind, everything was going to be taken care of.
She says this woman, Mary Russell, took care of all of her final arrangements decades ago, something she was proud of, an effort to make sure her kids were not left with a burden.
I'm just so glad that she passed on without realizing what was actually happening now, because she would be so worried, so upset.
Despite all that, her daughter sat here last week more stressed out than ever.
If she had known what was going on now, she would be devastated.
In the midst of her grief,
I just,
she scrambled to do exactly what her mom took steps to avoid.
She paid out like she was supposed to, and then she had to turn around and be dishonored like this. It's not fair to her.
Skaggs says her mom bought a plot at what was formerly Tri-Cities Memory Gardens, as well as a pre-need burial contract here. But much to her disappointment, this will not be her mother's final resting place. The cemetery officially changed owners and names in the last couple of months after financial troubles, bankruptcy, and ultimately foreclosure. The new owners are refusing to honor pre-existing contracts. Contracts like the one June Morell's family signed late last year. Months after her burial,
I know she would be terribly disappointed.
The nearly $2,000 grave marker and vase they bought are still missing.
Instead of grieving, it seems like you spend more time mad about this situation than actually being sad over her death.
We really feel for these families.
Eugene Allison is one of the new owners. He and his partner bought the cemetery at a foreclosure sale. Allison argues he didn't buy the company, just the land.
The existing contracts stayed with Tri-Cities Memory Gardens, Inc.
He also says he doesn't have control of the trust that holds the money from all of the pre-need contracts. And even if he did, he's convinced there's not enough money there to cover the needs of the thousands of people who previously bought services here. Allison says the family that previously owned the cemetery for the last 4 decades is to blame, and he's directing grieving, pre-existing customers to them.
Jeff Gasperson and his company, Tri-Cities Memory Gardens, needs to come up here and perform the services and provide the merchandise that it contracted to provide years ago.
Have I done it exactly perfect? No, sir.
Jeff Gasperson is the first to admit he's at fault for the cemetery's financial troubles that led to the foreclosure.
We've worked our ass off to take care of families.
But sitting at the other cemetery his family owns in Church Hill, he says the Blunteville Cemetery, along with any of its contracts and problems, are now in the hands of the new owners.
I left everything exactly where I was supposed to leave it.
Records reveal the state of Tennessee previously called into question Gasperson's management of the cemetery. A 2014 audit found 15 problems, some of them repeat issues, including his failure to make proper trust deposits on time for dozens of customers.
I'm disputing the audit.
A lawsuit recently filed by the North Carolina Cemetery Commission also raised concerns about trust mismanagement at a Gasperson cemetery in Buncombe County, something he says his family is in the process of resolving. Regardless, he insists there is plenty of money in the Merchandise and Services Trust to cover all of his former customers.
A couple of $100,000 in the trust.
He says the new company needs to find a way to use that money.
They have a responsibility to administer the trust.
Well, that's not true. None of that is true.
Both sides are adamant their hands are tied, and both say there's nothing they can do to help pre-existing customers.
If I had the money to help them, I'd help them.
Is there anything you all can do?
Not without funding.
Allison cites the same law Gasperson showed us to conclude that man, not him, is responsible for handling the previous contracts.
These families can show who they paid for this service.
The dishonor that has been shown to her, she didn't deserve it.
To take out of this world the soul of our deceased sister.
At the moment, Barbara Skaggs could care less who's to blame. All she knows is someone disrespected her mother.
Everything that she didn't want done happened.
Thank you, Jesus, for holding her hand just like you hold ours.
Now she's not burying her mom next to Mary's husband, as originally planned.
She has to be buried somewhere else.
Instead, she's burying her in Virginia. 12 days later,
I'm taking what she left me to bury her.
and she's using the $5,000 her mom left behind to give her a proper goodbye.
Ashes to ashes, dust to dust.
I just want to gain her respect.
Now for the rest of you, if you bought a plot, that plot is still yours, but the merchandise and services, those are what appear to be at risk. Gasperson says customers bought insurance with their funeral packages, and those packages should be transferable to any other funeral home. And Kylie, after we got involved, the two sides pledged to try and work together to come up with some kind of short-term solution.
And I understand that the state is now involved. I mean, this is a powerful story.
Yeah, the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance is involved. The spokesperson told me the agency is, quote, evaluating the best way to address the issues, end quote. I plan on following up with the state first thing tomorrow morning. We're going to stay on top of this.
All right, thanks so much, Nate.
Attorneys for the state of Tennessee say it's now up to the new owners of a Blunttville cemetery to make things right for people who previously bought burial contracts there. In fact, community watchdog Nate Morabito found out the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance told the new owners today they are not allowed to do any new business until this is resolved. Nate?
Sarah, the state sent the new owners a letter today. It says when they bought Tri-Cities Memory Gardens a couple months ago, they not only bought the property, they also bought all of its liabilities and contracts. Now, until the situation is resolved, the state is only allowing the cemetery to provide services for pre-existing contracts, not new ones. The grieving families we introduced you to yesterday say this is welcome news.
To ashes, dust to dust.
Just 24 hours after this heartbroken daughter said goodbye to her mother, Barbara Skaggs almost seems like a different person.
Amen. Amen.
Instead of crying, she's smiling.
I love it. I think that is so great.
She's talking about this letter. The Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance sent it to the new owners of this cemetery today, the cemetery where her mom was supposed to be buried, the place that refused to honor her mom's contract.
They say God uses the bad things that happened in your life and he turns it into good.
Today she takes great joy knowing her mother's story is making a difference.
My mother's passing has really opened up eyes to help for other people, and I really appreciate that, and I feel like it's honoring her in a special way.
East Tennessee Funeral Home has the trust, or has the trust to use.
While the
existing contracts stayed with Tri-Cities Memory Gardens, Inc.
and current owners deferred responsibility to each other, people like Jed Connerly's grandmother suffered. But today,
it seems like we're getting somewhere after several weeks of going back and forth.
Connerly feels like the state's action could finally force the cemetery to place the vase and grave marker they bought at his grandmother's grave.
We would like to have closure on this thing. It's, we paid for all this.
That's my mother.
Another group of people are seeking a different kind of closure.
She was just a sweetheart.
People like Bonnie Gray's family.
And it hurts me most for my dad, who is having such a difficult time anyway.
This wasn't supposed to be the 84-year-old's final resting place.
They bought their plots in 1974.
Instead, Susan Arney says her parents bought plots at Tri-Cities Memory Gardens more than 40 years ago, on Valentine's Day of all days. Because of the ongoing dispute here, the family had to buy new plots somewhere else last month.
Her and my father were married for 65 years.
That way, when Bonnie's husband dies, the pair won't be separated.
All I want is for them to reimburse my father at full market value.
Unfortunately, Barbara Skaggs' mother and father were separated because of this.
I would like to be reimbursed everything that she paid for and all the interest that money incurred.
She also says the cemetery needs to pay her family back. Remember, she used all of the money her mother left behind to cover the second burial contract. That's put her in a financial bind. And if she doesn't come up with a solution soon, she may lose the house her mom left her too.
I need to just figure out a way that I can keep my mom's home and get financially stable.
Now, Sarah, as great as this sounds, this may drag on some more. The new owners intend to dispute the state's position sent in that letter today. They continue to say the burden to resolve this situation should fall on the former owner. The state just told me a few minutes ago they're going to continue to monitor this situation closely.
It's going to be so hard for those families.
Yeah, it really
to
is.
deal with.
Hit it for them.
All right, Nate, thanks.
Blountville Cemetery's new owners now are pledging to help the grieving families who were hassled by an ongoing dispute there, including the daughter of a woman who paid to be buried next to her husband instead now lays in a grave in Virginia.
The dishonor that has been shown to her, she didn't deserve it.
The change of heart comes after our community watchdog and the state of Tennessee got involved. Nate Morbido found out that new owners are now ready to put this situation behind them. Nate?
Josh, the state previously told those new owners, regardless of the cemetery's past problems, they, not the previous owner, were responsible for making things right. Despite offering to settle with the state last week, the new owners today took things a step further. They not only committed to honoring the pre-need contracts of all previous customers, they also agreed to reimburse those who paid for burial services twice as a result of this mess.
Alan Bittinger buried his mother in February.
This month she would have been 92.
The change of ownership at this cemetery made the timing of her death even worse.
What can one say about a mom? She always took care of me. Up until the last few years, I've been taking care of her.
Today, this son is still trying to take care of his mom.
My dad was a Methodist minister, and she was a full-time Methodist minister's wife.
In reality, those parents took steps to avoid their kids' recent troubles.
These are the contracts that my father had signed.
Decades ago, the Bittingers bought pre-need contracts at Tri-Cities Memory Gardens. But when Vivian Bittinger died on February 16th, the new owners of the cemetery wouldn't honor that pre-existing contract.
They wouldn't even bury her. We had to pay more money. It wasn't right.
Not only did they charge this family again for something they already paid for,
And they charged you again.
Yes. They charged us $2,500.
they charged them significantly more.
When I came here, I ended up having to pay for the opening and closing and extra because it was on a Saturday.
And how did that make you feel?
Cheated.
Now, when he thinks back to the days after his mom's death, that is what he remembers.
It was bad enough that my brother and I had lost our mother. And then for this to happen it was devastating.
The cemetery's new owners bought Tri-Cities Memory Gardens at a foreclosure sale and have maintained all along they are not responsible for the financial troubles of the past owner, Jeff Gasperson, a man they say should have to honor all previous contracts.
Even though Jeff Gasperson is not willing to take responsibility for that, we are. And we will honor all outstanding contracts.
Today, as we talked with Bittinger, the cemetery manager approached us and committed to moving past all of this.
So we're willing to take that responsibility of someone else's debts and someone else's irresponsibility to move on.
Not only that, the manager told us once the new owners take control of what they believe is an underfunded merchandise and services trust, people like Bittinger and others will get refunds.
Like I said, once I pull the contract, review it, and able to access that money, you will receive some monies back.
Are you going to be able to make things right for all of these people?
Yes.
All of them?
Yes.
That's 100% your commitment.
It took some time and arm twisting to get to this point.
I would have felt the same way.
But the manager says he understands where customers are coming from.
And I hope they realize who's the bigger person.
Bittinger welcomes the news. He just wishes the new owners would have acted sooner and hopes they now live up to their promise.
I think if he does what he's saying, I will be happy. I'm concerned, though, that he won't.
And you mentioned this family had to pay significantly more for services that their mom had already paid for back in the 80s at a much lower rate. Why is that?
Yeah, I asked that question. That's a really good question. We were wondering. The manager says that was the owner's decision to charge the market value instead of at cost or even below cost or even discounted in this situation.
Tonight, yet another twist in the ongoing saga at what was formerly Tri-Cities Memory Gardens. Nate Morbido found out customers are again stuck in the middle. Nate?
Josh, the situation brought yet another woman to tears. Remember, after we got involved, as the state got involved as well, the new owners eventually agreed to take over all of the cemetery's former contracts, something the previous owner argued was their responsibility. But then we obtained this letter he wrote asking former customers to send him money. April will mark 1 year since the sudden and shocking death of Jimmy Gross. He's now buried at what was formerly Tri-Cities Memory Gardens.
That's been hard enough to deal with.
Today, his mom is still struggling, and the ongoing problems at the cemetery haven't helped her cause.
Thinking that possibly I can't be buried next to my son is just torture. It's just torture, and it has just brought, all of this has just brought back everything.
It all stems from this letter sent from the former cemetery owner to her and dozens of others in early February. It asks customers to mail all future payments to him. As a result, Gross says she sent a small payment to Jeff Gasperson to help cover her and her husband's plots and pre-need contracts to make certain one day they will be buried next to their son. But then, several weeks later, she learned some disturbing news.
They run the company. They have the customers.
She heard Gasperson tell us he no longer owns the company. That's when she learned Tri-Cities Memory Gardens was technically out of business.
Why would you send a letter out when this company doesn't exist?
So what's his answer?
People heard you say that you don't own the company anymore, right? That everything is now in East Tennessee Cemetery's hands. So why would you need to collect money?
Gasperson declined an on-camera interview for this story, but by phone told us he's just trying to look out for the customers. He told us until the new owners formally take over the cemetery's trust accounts, he wants to make sure all payments, including any profits from the last 5 years of sales, go directly into the trust. He calls it an effort to shore up the cemetery's trust and give it stability, a trust he previously told us was in good shape, one the new owners think is underfunded.
Every penny except for reasonable administrative fees would go into this trust if they send you the money. That's what you want. Could you understand why some people might feel uncomfortable sending you the money?
Gasperson says if those people like, they can hold their payments until the state resolves this situation. Gross is going to do just that.
I can't send any more money because this place doesn't exist.
She also turned over the letter to the state of Tennessee.
I was advised by the Department of Insurance and Commerce not to pay any more money until this was looked into.
So obviously the Department of Commerce and Insurance is aware of this letter. Although they gave her some advice, they've not made any formal opinion about that letter. A spokesperson tells us the agency is preparing a response to share publicly in order to help consumers. He hopes that response will be out later this week.
What did the new owners say about all this?
Well, you can imagine probably what they say, the way this thing is played out. But in their eyes, they say any money collected by Gasperson, the former owner who no longer runs the company, in their eyes would constitute unlicensed activity.
All right, we know you'll stay on top of it. Nate Morbido. Nate, thank you very much.
It resulted in even more tears for many during the most difficult times of their lives.
Now, customers paid for their final arrangements, but two cemeteries did not live up to their end of the deal, both the result of financial troubles. One situation is now resolved, the other is ongoing. In addition to the financial issues and broken promises, our community watchdog uncovered the situations have something else in common. Customers say the state of Tennessee did not do enough to regulate the cemeteries on the front end. Those customers asked us to investigate, so Nate Morbido followed the paper trail.
Josh, the Department of Commerce and Insurance maintains the agency first became aware of the major problems at Hawkins County Memorial Gardens near Rogersville and the former Tri-Cities Memory Gardens in Blountville in late 2012 through its normal course of inspections and audits, and then took action. The agency insists there were no major red flags prior to 2012, but we found documents that show a pattern of problems. Linda Weiniger makes the lonely walk to her husband's grave.
Oh, my husband was amazing.
With her soulmate gone,
Hi, baby. Hi, honey.
her journey is already painful enough.
You know, I miss you with all my heart.
But almost 2 years after Carmen's death,
We were supposed to grow old together.
she lives with even more grief.
I love you.
Despite signing a contract with Hawkins County Memorial Gardens and paying for a grave marker in June 2013,
It's broken again. I'll fix that.
this makeshift marker is all that sits at his grave.
It bothers me. It breaks my heart that you don't have your marker. 'Cause you deserve it.
Even worse, she used her husband's life insurance money to pay for her final arrangements, and recently found out from the state she is going to have to pay for those services all over again.
It makes me furious because I don't have the money.
The former owner of the cemetery is now in jail, awaiting trial on theft charges, among other things. Her mismanagement left the cemetery with no money to operate and prompted the state to take control last year.
What folks are going through it's difficult, and we're trying to do our best to resolve the situation.
The Department of Commerce and Insurance is working to turn things around here. But for Weiniger, it's too little, too late.
I know Vicki Ringley cheated every one of us, but I also think the state of Tennessee and the Funeral Bureau Commissioner did not do their jobs.
Over at what is now East Tennessee Cemetery in Blountville, Alan Bittinger shares similar concerns.
She would have been 92.
He buried his mother in February. She paid for her final arrangements decades ago, but financial troubles here led Tri-Cities Memory Gardens to file for bankruptcy and then foreclosure, which ultimately led to new owners taking over, and a brief dispute over who was actually responsible for honoring old contracts. That resulted in some people burying their loved ones at other cemeteries. Now that the state's resolved the situation, Bittinger is expected to eventually get a refund, but he's still unsatisfied.
I guess the one person I'm upset with is the state of Tennessee, believe it or not. They are a regulatory agency, and they should be regulating.
Were there any red flags in either of these situations that maybe stuck out years ago?
In terms of doing the process, in terms of our audits, I mean, we look at the records, and there was nothing that really tipped us off.
Up until the last few years, the agency maintains it was not aware of any major problems at either of these cemeteries. But in both cases, years of state audits show a history of issues. At Hawkins County Memorial Gardens, a 2003 audit raised questions about the cemetery's failure to deposit money into its improvement care trusts. 2 years later, another audit flagged several issues, including lack of timely deposits and a $19,000 deficit in one trust. The state could have pursued fines, but didn't until 2012, when it fined the owner $250. The assistant commissioner says those prior issues never rose to the level of major concerns.
I think that when we identified the issues, we acted.
He says the only way they really could have caught the problems here any sooner would have been if the cemetery owner truthfully cooperated with auditors.
Ultimately, they're required to submit information, and what they submit, they're supposed to be honest, and they're supposed to provide accurate documentation. And particularly in Ms. Ringley's case, I mean, she was intentionally being deceptive.
At the former Tri-Cities Memory Gardens, a 2006 audit found several issues, including a deficit in one trust, a failure to make timely deposits in another, and a failure to file annual reports. 3 years later, auditors again raised concerns about lack of timely deposits and the cemetery's failure to file reports on time. By 2011, state documents show auditors found a $32,000 deficit in one trust and a $251,000 deficit in the other. The state says while that audit was pending, the agency was pursuing civil penalties, but wasn't able to finalize those penalties because the cemetery filed for bankruptcy. Do you all feel like you've done the best that you can?
I think that we have, and I think we're working toward trying to move forward and resolving all of the situations.
In both cases, the assistant commissioner does not consider any of those prior findings warning signs. Instead, he says the state did the best it could
under the circumstances. Can you understand why people are upset and feel like the state's partially responsible?
I understand why people are upset. I think this is a difficult situation for anyone to go through, and most certainly empathize with that. Wish it didn't have to happen to them.
All right, so looking back, is there anything the state could have done better? I asked that question. The Department of Commerce and Insurance's top representatives say the agency is constantly trying to refine its internal processes and improve for the public. But at the end of the day, a spokesperson says this agency is a forward-looking entity. And Josh, in fairness to the state, we should point out, if it weren't for the state getting involved in both of these cases, they both may be worse than they were and are today.
Some of the customers, including Weiniger, have suggested there needs to be a change in the legislation so that Tennessee would be required to have more oversight. What about that?
Yeah, they're not the only ones that think that. Tyler Tetrick, he's the president of the Cemetery Association of Tennessee. He's also a local cemetery operator. He told me he'd like to see the state change the way it audits cemeteries altogether. Instead of bringing in a state auditor, he thinks legislators should make cemeteries pay for their own audits, get independent, certified public accountants, trained professionals who he says, quote, know what they're doing, end quote. He thinks the audits would only be necessary once every 5 years, and he's hoping next legislative session the Cemetery Association will try and present that idea to the state.
Nate, thank you. Nate made one more interesting discovery. It involves one of the auditors responsible for 4 of the previous audits between the 2 cemeteries. The former auditor's personnel file revealed although his bosses previously commended him for years of doing an exceptional job, they warned him in 2010 about his work habits and performance, and then gave him a written warning in March 2011. Among their concerns, inefficiency or incompetency in the performance of duties. 2 months later, he retired. His bosses never cited specific instances at either of the cemeteries in question. One more note. Meanwhile, we learned today the former owner of Hawkins County Memorial Gardens, Vicki Ringley, will go to trial October 13th. She's accused of stealing thousands of dollars from 370 of her customers.
Well, it is a heartbreaking story that played out through a series of community watchdog investigations over several months. A financially struggling cemetery changed hands at the beginning of this year and left dozens of innocent, grieving customers stuck in the middle during the most difficult times of their lives. Nate Morabito has remained in those customers' corners from the beginning, and his efforts are continuing to pay off.
Sarah, one customer recently received a more than $2,000 check as a result. Remember, despite signing pre-need contracts and paying for burial services under the previous owner, when the cemetery changed owners earlier this year, customers of what is now East Tennessee Cemetery were faced with an unbelievable decision. Either bury their loved ones somewhere else or pay for their loved ones' final arrangements all over again. Not only did that take an emotional toll, it cost those people money. Now, some of them are getting their money back.
Alan Bittinger walked to his mother's grave in early March.
This month she would have been 92.
Just weeks after laying her to rest. Despite his mom buying a pre-need contract at Tri-Cities Memory Gardens decades ago,
these are the contracts that my father had signed.
When Vivian Bittinger died on February 16th, the cemetery's new owners refused to honor that contract.
We came out here and they wouldn't even bury her. We had to pay more money. It wasn't right.
Even worse, East Tennessee Cemetery charged his family significantly more to bury his mom.
And they charged you again?
Yes. They charged us $2,500.
How did that make you feel?
Cheated.
At the time, neither the former manager nor the new owners would take responsibility for existing contracts. Right. So we in the state got involved. With some arm twisting, the new owners who bought the cemetery at a foreclosure sale eventually stepped up and made a commitment to both us and the state.
We're willing to take that responsibility of someone else's debts and someone else's irresponsibility to move on.
Not only did the cemetery agree to honor all previous contracts,
once I pull the contract, review it, and able to access that money, you will receive some monies back.
The cemetery manager assured Bittinger and others they would eventually get a refund.
Are you going to be able to make things right for all of these people?
Yes.
All of them?
Yes.
Anyone that has, been put out over the last few weeks because of this, you're willing to make it right for them?
Oh, yes.
That's 100% your commitment.
Mm-hmm.
Bittinger had his doubts.
I think if he does what he's saying, I will be happy. I'm concerned, though, that he won't.
Fast forward almost 3 months later.
He called me and told me he had a check for me.
Bittinger recently received a pleasant surprise. The manager called him up and made good on his promise.
The one thing he did say is that he said he would do it, and he said, I'm doing it.
In the end, this grieving son received a more than $2,100 refund for his mother's burial, money his mother never wanted him to spend in the first place.
I'm just glad we still have people in this world who will keep their word.
Sarah, the cemetery manager tells me he's mailed or hand-delivered refund checks to several families. He's still working on resolving any remaining issues. He also says the cemetery and its employees have reached out to every customer who's had a problem since we began asking questions.
It's a lot of work, and I take that and includes people who have paid for markers that crews have yet to install.
Yeah, you know, remember we talked about one woman who died late last year. Her family bought a roughly $2,000 grave marker. As of last week, it still wasn't there. The manager says the cemetery just placed an order for all of the outstanding grave markers, including the ones the previous owner should have handled before the property changed hands. The hope is those grave markers will be installed by September.
Getting back on the right track for sure. All right, Nate Morbido reporting for us. A great update, Nate. Thanks.
It's something that no family ever would want to have to deal with.
Yeah, two sides bickering over money while trying to bury their loved ones. But that's exactly what played out at a Blountville cemetery earlier this year.
Now, East Tennessee Cemetery would not honor pre-need contracts after foreclosure and a change in ownership, forcing some to bury their loved ones at other cemeteries, some to pay twice for burials, and others to wait for the grave markers their loved ones previously bought.
Instead of grieving, it seems like you spend more time mad about this situation than actually being sad over her death.
Our community watchdog investigation prompted action after Nate Morbido started asking questions. The new owners promised to take responsibility for the former manager's mismanagement here. Nate found out they continue to live up to their end of the bargain.
You may remember they gave refunds to the customers who were double billed back in June, but that didn't help the dozens of families waiting on grave markers, vases, and plaques. Back then they told us those items should start coming in September. Families are now finally getting what their loved ones paid for.
It's never easy visiting his grandmother's grave, but today, for the first time since June Morell's death back in November,
it's a huge relief.
Jed Connerly doesn't feel quite as empty.
To finally see it, it really means a lot.
He's talking about his grandmother's grave marker. In the days after Morell's death, her family paid almost $2,000 for it. But through winter, spring, and summer, her grave sat unmarked.
It was kind of hard to see with nothing here, and I know she wouldn't like that.
And her grave wasn't the only one. Dozens of other contracts went unfulfilled too. And for a short time, neither the former manager nor new owners would take responsibility.
Things happen for a reason, and that's okay. It was a little speed bump that we had to overcome.
It took some arm twisting by us and the state, but eventually the new owners came around, committing to make things right for all of the families who bought pre-need contracts under the previous owner.
We did take on the responsibility of the cemetery, which included some debt. And in turn, we have fulfilled and are fulfilling those promises.
East Tennessee Cemetery estimates the previous owner failed to fulfill contracts for 160 grave markers, vases, scrolls, plaques, and dates of death. He says the cemetery has already installed roughly 40 of those and hopes the rest will be in place by the end of the year.
If we give you our word, then we will fulfill it.
June Morell's case is proof.
Even though it took 11 months, I know she would be thrilled with it.
Back in March, Connerly had his doubts this day would come. But for the last several months, he says the cemeteries remain committed.
This is something I know she would have wanted just as soon as she was buried. This would have meant a lot to her.
So today begins a new season. It's long overdue, but that doesn't seem to matter anymore.
Having this here, we finally have closure.
So if you think June Morell's family had to wait a long time, listen to this. The cemetery says one family had to wait 21 years to simply get the date of death on their loved one's marker. The new owners say they have since fulfilled that contract as well as other contracts that date back 3, 4, and 5 years, contracts sold by the previous owner. Josh, it's worth mentioning here as well, the state says it does not have any unresolved complaints against this cemetery that was previously an issue. The cemetery remains in good standing and can continue to sell new contracts.
All right, Nate Morbido. Nate, thank you very much.